Welcome to the Dropping Into Power podcast, where we'll be hearing stories about the transformational power of surfing from women surfers of all ages, all levels, and all over. We'll hear about courage, commitment, struggles, frustration, epiphany, and, of course, life transformations large and small. I'm your host, Sheila Gallion, and I am stoked to share these conversations with these amazing women full of so much passion with all of you. So aloha and welcome to the Dropping Into Power podcast. My guest today is Kris Primacio. Kris currently serves as the CEO of the International Surf Therapy Organization, or ISTO, which is a 501c nonprofit she co-founded in 2017 in Cape Town, South Africa. You're going to love this story. Kris utilizes her psychology degree as a highly skilled, compassionate, empathetic, and solutions-oriented professional, and applies her genuine love for the sport of surfing and proven knowledge of the healing benefits of the ocean to help advance the exposure and research on surf therapy as a health intervention through ISTO. I was introduced to Kris through the amazing Dr. Candace Myrie that I interviewed recently. And Kris didn't even start surfing till she was 41, and her life completely flipped and transformed at rocket speed. She has this incredible energy, and she was always a person of service, but she's harnessed this energy, and you'll definitely hear the story of what she's created through this amazing, amazing energy, focus, transformation, and power. And I definitely want to come back. We're going to talk about her work because it's really fascinating. I was probably most surprised by who this work actually serves, and we'll definitely talk about that later on. But I want to start out with, Kris, I want to start with your connection to your ancestry, because you have a really interesting connection. And you also have a really important story because people have such a sort of preconceived idea of what it's like to be Hawaiian, to be part Hawaiian. They imagine everybody living in paradise, surfing, and living kind of at this ideal standard, but it's really not the case. And I'll let you kind of tell your whole piece of the story because you have very interesting lineage and also family all over. And so I'll just let you start. Tell me about your heritage and your history and your connection with Hawaii and your experience not surfing in Hawaii.
Well, hello, Sheila, and thank you so much for having me. I really love organizations and institutions, and now this new, methodology of getting to connect with people over podcasts and in a way that I have met, and I'm sure you have as well, people that you might not have ever met had you not talked about these subjects or thought about talking about these subjects. So thank you so much for having me and for highlighting surf therapy and surfing from my point of view, which is really kind of exciting to chat about. So my ancestry, I am Hawaiian Filipino, and both my parents are Hawaiian Filipinos. So I am fully Hawaiian Filipino. Grew up in Seattle, Washington, though. So that makes my journey to surfing interesting. And as you already mentioned, having not started until I was 41, there's a lot of reasons for that, because in the Pacific Northwest, not really known for surfing. It does have surfing and much more surfing today than when I was growing up. But, I spent every summer in Hawaii with my aunties and my uncles. And the thing is you don't go surfing if people around you don't surf. That's just a fact. And this is a little deeper conversation, but who is surfing really made for? When you look at surfing on media, when you look at surfing on TV, when you look at surfing in the movies, it very often is white, blonde men, actually, mostly men. And, here and there's a movie or two with some women in it. But, it's really interesting. It's not something I ever thought that I would do. I saw surfing. I spent every summer at the beaches in Hawaii. I saw the people surfing. It looked fun, but it just never occurred to me that I would surf. That's a really interesting. I love this question because it's so interesting about why I didn't see myself in that role, especially as a Hawaiian Filipino. I don't know, but there's plenty of surfing in the Philippines, by the way, but Yeah, I come from this background where if you're not surrounded by it, you don't do it. And growing up, especially in the Pacific Northwest, I was always called to nature. I am a rock climber. I hiked many, many mountains across Washington state. I skied. I grew up skiing and wakeboarding and all of these things. But my water was rivers and oceans.
Mm-hmm.
And, being 3.5, 4 hours away from the Pacific Ocean, I only went to the Pacific Ocean to go camping. And it never,
Right.
again, never occurred to me. We'd go near the ocean, we'd go clamming, digging for clams. We would drop our Dungeness crab nets and catch our, fresh Dungeness crab out of the Pacific Northwest. Again, growing up, never ever saw surfers there in the Pacific Northwest, and only really in Hawaii. But when you're sitting there with your cousins and your aunties and uncles, and none of them are going in, you just you do kind of what everyone's doing. I love that idea of it's really hard to think that you can be something or do something if you don't see it. And it's really, really true. So yes,
That's
I did
so
not
important.
grow up surfing.
Yeah. It's a really important concept, as you're saying. And I know you've also mentioned before when we chatted that, some of your family and some of the people you knew, if you didn't have a car, I mean, some people were poor, they lived further from the beach. So, it's actually true that people, you imagine that everybody that lives in Hawaii is just buzzing off to the ocean every day, but it's not easy. And if you don't have a car, so
yeah, that goes back to, for me, the question of who exactly was surfing made for. And I guess I hate to just be so broad and casting that wide net, but it certainly doesn't feel like it was made for marginalized communities, because who can afford surfboards and wetsuits? I mean, sure, who can afford a car to go down to the beach all the time? And in my family, my aunties and uncles, my father, but they worked all day. So there was no running the kids down to the beach and what have you. So unfortunately, a lot of the BIPOC community really are not surfers. And again, you see this in Africa, and you see this around the world, where persons of color are the majority and they still do not have access to go surfing. I just think it's a much steeper, mountain to climb. Again,
definitely.
when you don't ever see that when you're growing up. And another thing, surfing and the industry of surfing has been around for a very long time, certainly our entire lives. But frankly, the surf industry is one of the worst offenders for inclusion and diversity. And for that matter, gender stereotypes. Because if you see men's surf gear represented in the media, they're on the sickest wave, the background of my
right.
You see them cutting and doing aerials. And for women, they're sitting on the beach in bathing suits.
Or they're standing and their butts are hanging out and with a surfboard. I mean, that's, or if they're surfing, they're in a position that shows the perfect ass cheeks, So I know I see that go. I don't know if you're on the Women Who Surf Facebook group, but it's this amazing group. This woman, Vanessa Yeager, started. There's 22,000 members now. And I see this topic come up now and again. Somebody had just had a rant on Instagram and just gone after it. I can't remember which. I'm not going to slander the company, although we could pick any of them, but it was one of the companies. And just in case they didn't offend anything this month. And there it was the same thing. It was, and we know that they're selling, that there's only X number of surfers. So clearly they're selling an image. And so they're selling, but I am positive that there are lots and lots and lots of women who would be more inspired to look like the girl ripping on the board than the girl just with the butt cheeks, I mean, there's enough of that. So yeah.
And amen to that, because by the way, most of us don't look like the supermodel walking around with the surfboard in the ad. Sometimes the fins aren't even on. I mean, it's like, okay, this is clearly not a surfer. This is not representative. It's not representative of what girls want to do in the water. I love that Facebook page is up to 22,000.
It's amazing.
Women. That's really cool. I heard a rumor that during COVID, 3 million people took up surfing. And I have to tell you, at my break, it kind of feels like 1 million of them are at my break. But I fortunately surf with a lot of women in the lineup. And honestly, and persons of color, people of color, I so rarely see Filipinos in the water. Again, surfing, we are the Philippines and Hawaii, we are surrounded by water. And yet so many of us didn't have the opportunity to grow up doing this beautiful sport, which of course connects us to nature and so much more. But yes,
that's interesting. Do you think there's anything too culturally about not wanting to get sun? Because I know culturally,
absolutely.
Because there's a lot of,
there's a really beautiful documentary that just came out, We Are Waves, by one of our surf therapy programs in Sri Lanka, Sea Sisters of Sri Lanka. And they did a whole piece on this lovely, beautiful young woman who wanted to start surfing. And in Sri Lanka, not only is it frowned upon, it's discouraged for you to go surfing. As a matter of fact, not to spoiler alert, it's a beautiful documentary. It's not very long. It's like 18 minutes. Again, We Are Waves. But even her family was saying, if you surf, you'll get darker and no man will want to marry you.
Wow.
So really hard things to hear and see from these cultures that value something, and understandably, mad respect, right? Like they want the best for their daughter. They want their daughter to be cared for and okay. And their idea of that is the daughter needs to be married. That's the only idea of the daughter will be okay only if she's married. And if she gets too dark from surfing, nobody will want her. Right. So absolutely. I think that is certainly a piece to it. And we've seen that in Africa as well.
Really?
It's really heartbreaking. I'd like to believe from last year's racial wars and crisis. I mean, that's really the accurate word. And of course, last year was not the first year we have seen this severity in racial conflict. But I really truly believe that people are embracing their heritage and and what makes them unique and special. Because the only thing that makes us unique and special is what makes us different from another person.
That's a great observation.
Not the things that make us look the same. Right. I always wanted to be tall and blonde and blue-eyed. And to be, a Hawaiian Filipino, meaning shorter, brown hair, brown eyes. It was so boring to me. It was I have much darker skin. And, growing up, I grew up around a lot of white people in my little town out of Seattle, Washington. It was dominantly white people. So I did not want to stand out. I mean, I can remember we sort of joke in the Asian culture about the smell of when our family's cooking, because the whole house smells like, rice vinegar and fish sauce. And it's almost like you're not Asian unless you have fish sauce cooking with your soy sauce and all of the different meats. I mean, my dad would make octopus and the whole house would just smell so much. And I would be embarrassed. I used to be embarrassed of that. And now I'm thinking, no, my friends would beg me to come over for dinner because the food was so good. And it's interesting how, obviously looking back on it in hindsight, I so much wanted to be like everybody else. And of course, now realizing, wait, I was special because I was
right. But you're getting none of those messages. And, I So my daughter is mixed and her dad is Hawaiian Chinese. And it is a huge regret of mine that I did not understand what she was facing at all. So being a white person, even though my mom, she was Spanish and she had some, what they used to call ethnic features. And so she had dealt with some prejudice in her life and she was always very sensitive, but it still wasn't really how I grew up. And so the way I was kind of raised was to be colorblind. Like, oh, we just don't notice, everyone's the same, but actually everyone is not the same. Everyone is equal, but not the same. And so me trying to raise my daughter that way, she was very unseen by me not understanding what she was going through and feeling so different. We lived for a while in Calabasas, which is, pretty white. And this, the Kardashians live there, I mean, you can be a little bit mixed if you're a billionaire, but mostly those are the options. So, and people would stop her in stores and, oh, you're so beautiful. Your skin tone's so pretty, but she didn't hear that. All she heard was she was different. And, she had people asking her different questions. And then being from Hawaii, she's, people said, do they speak English in Hawaii? This is in, elementary school, but all of these things. And then what she can articulate now, she's 16, is she's like, but mom, I never saw me anywhere. I never saw me in the movies. I never saw me doing anything, not in sports, nowhere. And especially if you're mixed, and then you really don't have people that look like you. So even though she watched Disney, which does more representation, but it's really struck me what you said about that surfing piece. And I guess even in my world, I did mostly see men, surf, and we're close in that same age group. And I've now spoken to, many women who have really had that experience. And another friend of mine who I'm going to interview in a little bit, who she's exactly my age. She grew up on Maui. She never surfed either because it just you didn't see yourself out there. And it's just a really interesting metaphor for, if you don't know you can do it. And we'll talk about this later because you talked about I love this takeaway from your career. Like you have the career of your dreams, but you couldn't have dreamt about it because you didn't know it existed. And it's really kind of a metaphor for that. Like we don't know what we can do when we don't have the opportunity, and not seeing ourselves in that opportunity. I was probably a little closer. I guess I might've seen some blonde girls, but they were just carrying the surfboards, or watching the guys, right? I mean, they weren't out there surfing. And totally different kind of story. So
I want to very, very quickly just comment on what you said about feeling as if you did your daughter a disservice. We are all evolving. Yeah. We are all learning that this whole idea of colorblind means that you wouldn't be able to then see the discriminations and the oppression and the institutional wrongs that have been written a long time ago. So, bless you for even acknowledging it. And at 16, and I'm sure before 16, she, has a mom like you who says, gosh, I need to learn and I want to continue to evolve and be there. And I mean, again, Sheila, our generation, forget what mental health, that was not even a word.
Nobody noticed your mental health. I mean,
no,
I guess if they got really extreme, but no, it's funny. And I mean, the kids now are so articulate. They're so tuned into their own, it's amazing. I mean, my daughter has so many words and so many references and so much information, which is incredible. Yeah, no, mental health was not big on the topic for us. I don't think anybody, I had, nice parents, but that was definitely, I mean, what I remember is you're so hypersensitive, that was what I got instead of like, oh, well, let's process what you're going through. I definitely didn't get that. All right. So I have to mention why we've talked about heritage, but I have to point out that you are a descendant of, that was part of what I wanted to say, which
I never say this, but
can I say this? Because
you can say it.
Yeah, that you are part of the Kamehameha line. And I don't know if you we won't drag you into deep history, but do you have anything you want to say about that history of what that represents in Hawaii? Because I can just generally say that, the original King Kamehameha unified all of the islands, and he was a towering figure in many ways. And it's interesting to me that there's, you have this lineage, and interesting that it's embarrassing to you, that you don't want to talk
not
about
embarrassing.
it.
I'm very, very proud. I just, for some reason, I try not to lead with that, but because it's pretty far removed. As you know, we don't have kings and queens anymore.
Right.
Because of course the United States or the mainland took over Hawaii and
imprisoned the queen and stole the island, basically. Just to be clear for anybody
that doesn't. I prefer those words. I don't know why I feel like I need to be PC. It's not PC. I do want to speak. Words matter. And language matters. And you're right. That is exactly what happened. It was stolen, much like many parts of the United States of America from, again, another very large population of people of color, Indigenous and Native Americans. But I guess I feel like if that's part of my lineage, that's part of my bloodline through many, many people, by the way, my father's grandmother is a descendant of the first chief of Maui. There's a lineage from that breaks off into King Kamehameha, which is, of course, even further down the line. Opposite, I'm actually really proud to be a Hawaiian, and I'm really proud to have that lineage. And King Kamehameha was, frankly, before his time, quite literally, in what he was trying to move forward and be a part of, I guess our sort of Martin Luther King, not as, it wasn't as much of a scene in Hawaii because everybody at the time respected the king because there was that hierarchy. I don't know. I guess I do. I get embarrassed. I'm proud, but I also do silly get embarrassed about it, but only because the only thing that it means to me is the connection that I have to the beautiful, beautiful islands of Hawaii and knowing that the Hawaiian culture is so much about aloha. And that meaning love and life and family and it really encompasses everything. A lot of people think aloha means hello, which it also means, but so many other things in that spirit. It's really a lovely and privileged heritage to get to be a part of.
I love that.
So, I mean,
absolutely.
The only thing, to go into history, that's to me not as exciting because only in the sense of I hope that people, while they continue to learn about their ancestors, but it's not just the ancestors of their heritage, but those who paved the way for us to be here, for us to be able to do what we do. And that's so important.
I want to talk a little bit about that and kind of go into a little more of your story. And I know I definitely want to leave time to talk about your work because it's so fascinating. Because we talked a little bit about that, literally that idea of it being in your blood. Like it was just, surfing was just in there latent, and it definitely is not. There's definitely, people in the Hawaiian culture that are more the mountain people. They're definitely not all the water people and, the Pele people and, the people who are, everybody has their deep connection. But it definitely seemed like from your story, it was just simmering in there. And as soon as it was unleashed. So tell us a little bit about, how that switch got flipped, like what was going on in your life and how did you just suddenly start surfing at 41 and then what happened?
This is interesting. So yes, I was 41. I was lucky enough, like most of us, to be surrounded by people who essentially said, well, how come you don't surf? And of course I have to explain, I grew up in Seattle and so they took me surfing, a group of friends. And
where were you?
Pardon?
Where were you then? Where were you at that point?
I was in Manhattan Beach.
Okay.
Right. So, I mean, California, sunny Southern California, Manhattan Beach, and they actually took me down to a very famous surf break in Southern California called San Onofre. And it's super simple, easy, lovely, kind, generous waves that go forever. And it's the perfect spot to learn. And I remember my boyfriend at the time pushed me into that first wave. And Sheila, I remember I rode it almost all the way to the beach. And I remember thinking, I'm changed forever. And I also remember saying out loud, out loud to myself, out loud, that this is something I'm going to do. And I want to do it in all areas of my life. And I, again, had no idea what that meant. I certainly at 41 was not going to become a pro or anything such as that, but I would have done anything. I would have worked at a surf brand. I would have done anything to be immersed fully in the surfing community and surfers. So I watched every surf movie I could find. I've, dozens and dozens, probably over 75 movies. I read every book about surfing I could find. I am a complete geek, if anything else. I play fantasy surfing on the WSL. I've been playing for years. So, and I watch every contest, and I just wanted to get really good for starting so late in life. And so I just kind of made it a mission to surf every single day. And honestly, for a lot of people who tell me they've been surfing for 10 years, which I have now been surfing for 10 years, but who tell me they've been surfing for 20 years or what have you. Well, they didn't surf every day. And so I feel like I definitely had an advantage because of my proximity to the ocean. I live where I live so that I can walk down to the ocean. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, gosh, at the time, it had been 6 months almost to the day when my father had been diagnosed with cancer. And, I was ironically dating a boy I shouldn't have been dating, although he is the one who pushed me into that first wave. So I guess I have nothing but love for him. And, I had a job that was forgettable, and I'm certain many of us can remember a time in our life where we dated someone we shouldn't have been and probably were in a job that was forgettable.
Oh, never.
A whole nother podcast again. Is that a whole other podcast? But as far as my dad, he raised me and the love of my life. And when he was diagnosed with cancer, I know that I found myself running to the ocean and trying to surf all the time, every day. And at the time, I remember telling myself, well, I just don't want to suck. And now in hindsight, I absolutely know it was because it is the one place, as all surfers know and have experienced, where you're not concerned about what's happening on land. And it's almost as if, you get into flow state, right? And when you get into flow state, you can't think about that's what flow state is. You cannot think about anything else but what you are doing in the moment. And so I would get into flow state and really have an opportunity to forget about his CT scans and white blood cell counts dropping and the horrific steps that one goes through when they're watching their parent. It was a fast learning curve for me because, right, I just put everything into it. I said, I am going to immerse myself in all things surfing and become a complete geek about surfing. So yeah, it was definitely it was fast paced, and I'm thrilled that it, I guess, has all sort of turned out. But I'm a big believer in following your passions and finding your purpose. And when you lead in that way, you very often are surrounded by people who are there to also help lift you up. And I do believe that the universe wants all our wishes and dreams to come true. And we have to make the decisions and put ourselves in the position to be considered. And the other thing that I started doing in 2011 when I started surfing was volunteering. And I had always volunteered. I grew up volunteering. I spent my whole life seeking out opportunities to do so. I have volunteered for a month in Kenya at an orphanage. I helped paint the first high school in El Salvador. I've supported all the homeless projects in all of the areas that I've ever lived in. And because I grew up learning to give back to my community, it was a no-brainer that when I started surfing in 2011, I found a surf therapy program, which, by the way, I didn't even know what surf therapy was in 2011, but I had started volunteering there. And it's so, again, I can now look back over my past 10 years. In many ways, I feel like the stars aligned for me to ultimately what had happened was in 2016. So this was 5 years after I started surfing. I was asked to become the program manager for a local surf therapy organization here in the South Bay of Manhattan Beach. And, my father had passed away a month before that.
I'm so sorry.
And I feel like he sent me the job. I immediately said yes. My very dear friend and mentor, Carly Rogers, is a co-founder of Surf Therapy. We call her the mother of ocean therapy. She wrote her idea for a program when she was earning her occupational therapy degree back in 2012. And so she was about to go on maternity leave with her second baby and asked if I would take over. And I just remember immediately saying yes. And I knew it was because it would help me heal. I really did. Yeah. But saying yes to that is the exact same opportunity that brought me to South Africa at the end of 2017 to be one of several co-founders of the International Surf Therapy Organization. And as for being elected by the ISTO board to lead the helm of ISTO at the end of 2018, like I said, I just trust that I made the right decisions in my life to be in the place, to be considered. And it's really, I know it's unique, to go from 2011, I started surfing. 2016, I became a program manager of a surf therapy program. We were delivering 60 sessions a year to veterans, active duty military, and at risk, or now referred to as at promise youth from marginalized communities all over Los Angeles County. And that was such a privilege and such an honor. And I thought, oh my goodness, I will never leave this. This is the greatest thing on earth. And then a year and a half later, 2 years later, I become the CEO of the international global movement in surf therapy. So yeah, that is pretty special.
It's so amazing. I see 41. Watching this story unfold, like I just see it's just this, I keep using metaphors, but I see this incredible commitment. I see this incredible immersion, and I see this incredible aloha. And it's like, those things coming together, with the commitment, it's like a dual thing. Like you're committed to the wave, you're paddling to the set, but you're taking everybody with you. And that's an incredible message, because it's really challenging. I know I could just get very pinched off and selfish being a surfer sometimes, and ram my wave and trying to get it and getting not combative. I'm not getting combative, but feeling small instead of expanding, instead of instead of expanding my world, and this is, of course, we're not going to do this in every session, but just your overall metaphor for how you've lived this. And you literally did, you just stood at the altar and it's like, I surrender to you. And it was all of it, but the love in it is so palpable and powerful. Like the moment that you're on that wave and you felt that, I had a similar, it didn't come with as much purpose, but the minute literally my feet hit the water and I could walk into the freezing cold water, where same thing in Humboldt is where I started, where people never surfed before. I was like, this is it. This is it. This is it. My life will never be the same. But there's really such power in your story. And what you said earlier, which I wish I had written it down right then, but basically it was about putting yourself in the position to be given the opportunities. So it's all of those things coming together. And I think people wanting to commit their lives in such a way can really fill into this, really hear that piece that you 100% committed with complete willingness, and you answered every call. You showed up, you showed up, you showed up, you showed up.
Actually, that's one of my favorite compliments that I get from other people in my life, friends or family, is that I show up. And it does cross over to work. And you're absolutely right. Definitely. Because to start surfing at 41 and then to be paid to be in the surf world at 46, 5 years, that's not that long for somebody who just said, I want to be around surfing and I don't know what that means. And I have to say, the lesson is never give up on finding what your purpose is, because you never know when and where you're going to find that. And also volunteer. Because volunteering and getting outside of yourself can lead you, and in my case, to a lifelong dream that I never had, because I didn't know I could have this dream. And then also, technically, as a co-founder of ISTO, this position didn't exist.
Right. If you hadn't shown up and created and grown the organization just all together with this community of people, it would have never happened. Right. So in some ways, you literally, it was without your energy, and it just shows what an impact one person can make. Without your energy, that organization, that whole position may never have existed. And it's the synergy of it. So yeah, I love the message, and I love the call to volunteer. I think that's such an important part. I have not always been a volunteer. I'm working on it. There's a service here. I was thinking about trying to figure out how to bring showers to homeless people. And then I found that there's actually a company that does it. So I signed up to their site, and then I immediately got really sick, and, everything disappeared. But, I want to go back to that. There's a Surfers for Healing event going on in Hilo in a couple of weeks. So I am really trying to commit myself to that too. I tend to be very introverted. And so not that I can't be personable and bubbly, but I feel like my energy gets finite. And so for me, I think the trick is to find one thing to start with. And actually, this podcast is very much volunteer. So at this point, and, stepping into, my sense of purpose, which is wanting to, cheer for women. I'm particularly in surfing, because I just want to be immersed in it. And I am a great cheerleader, and cheer for myself, cheer for you, cheer for all of us. I don't want to use buzzwords like raising consciousness, but it's kind of like that, just lifting each other up. And what I started to say is, I think the new way of the world is human powered, not government powered. It's, let's get in there and do it. So very super inspiring. So I would like you to talk about what exactly is surf therapy and who you serve. You kind of mentioned the marginalized communities, and what's really interesting to me when we spoke briefly earlier about this, but what is surf therapy, and where was it, and what's it evolving into?
Whenever I get asked this question, I always think, you have to go volunteer at a session to really know what surf therapy is. I won't do it justice with my explanation, but it is building community, building safe spaces, and prioritizing the most underserved populations in the world. The surf therapy programs, for the most part, have somewhat of a template. And that template is one that, again, my mentor, Carly Rogers, sort of founded. And I mean, a very large amount of the organizations have followed in this sort of template. But bringing everybody together on the beach, having a sit down, sort of a circle, talking circle. I used to call them kumbaya circles, just an opportunity to have a chat. And in that circle and having chats, and there would be a theme and there would be a discussion, there would be a question posed. In that question, everybody answered, including, of course, volunteers, surf instructors, water safety instructors, beach volunteers, and of course, our participants, or I always refer to them as our athletes. And we would pose a question. And the idea of it was, part of it was to organically build this trust amongst one another without, with only having just met, right? Mm-hmm. We've got a very little finite amount of time to build trust with 90% of people who've never been surfing before. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is a large number of people that come down to these surf therapy communities and programs who have never surfed. And when you talk about the various populations, and I can go into that really quick, veterans and first responders and children on the autism spectrum and Down syndrome, or amputees, men recently released from prison, refugees, women struggling from trauma, abuse or violence, sex trafficking survivors, sight and hearing impaired, farmers. I don't know if you knew the farming industry, how high their suicidal tendencies were. I didn't know until a couple of programs have started prioritizing farmers and individuals suffering from PTSD and homelessness and addiction and LGBTQIA plus and the BIPOC communities, cancer survivors, Chernobyl survivors.
Wow, I'm getting like chills all over.
I know. I mean, Chernobyl survivors in Ireland's pretty interesting. And Syrian refugees, that's just incredible. But when you look at this list, and there are several others, but this is a pretty long list of individuals who, again, have never surfed. It's not even, for some of them, it's not even something that they were considering. A lot of our sight impaired, it's not something that you think you're going to be able to go do when you can't see. And there are programs out there ensuring that, they are reaching all of these people. And there's a little lesson on land, because that's important. We go over safety considerations, and then we get them out in the water. And the truth is, if we've done our job, then we let the healing powers of the ocean and therapeutic benefits of surfing happen. And we try to get out of the way of that.
No, it just made me cry. It's so can you be like a certified surf therapist at this point? Or who are the surf therapists and how does one go there?
So we say surf therapy practitioners.
Okay.
You cannot yet be a surf therapist because there is no university that acknowledges that. Now, that being said, Jamie Marshall, or now Dr. Marshall, who is on my board, on our board, the ISTO board, he has essentially just finished his dissertation and has become the first ever doctor of surf therapy, earning a PhD. So these are groundbreaking things. And it's so exciting, Sheila, to be alive and to get to be a part of that and to have experienced everything that he's gone through to make this happen. But, until universities acknowledge and offer up courses, there is not we don't use the word therapist out of great respect for those who have earned their occupational therapy degrees, or marriage family licensed therapists, or psychologists, or physical therapists, rec therapists, what have you. So we very much try to respect that. We refer to all of the founders and leaders of surf therapy programs as practitioners. That is the practice of surf therapy, which of course, by definition is all right. But, surf therapy, 99% of the programs are fully functioning because of volunteers. So volunteers are what makes it happen. And none of us go into this for the money, but you most definitely can make a career out of it. And organizations, I mean, we started with 8 surf therapy programs. We're currently working with 90.
Wow.
So 90 surf therapy programs, and there's probably 90 more, but they are functioning. And by the way, it is free to the participants, but it is not free to put on a day of surf therapy. You have surfboards, you have wetsuits, you have insurance. You need to, of course, cover on the beach. Most beaches require beach permits. So, and then again, most programs serve lunch or a snack. So it isn't free for the organizations to put the day together. It is free for the participants. And frankly, starting a nonprofit, it isn't easy in any sector. And the surf therapy sector is relatively unknown. If you really think about the sectors, I mean, when I say equine therapy or hippotherapy, same thing. A lot of people don't know that's therapy on horses that is accredited. You can go and get an accreditation for hippotherapy now. And, I guess I want to say, if you're listening and you're interested in creating a program, please, I encourage you to use our resources. And ISTO, we have working groups that meet monthly. We have quarterly webinars. And of course, we have our annual conferences.
So I'm a fan of ISTO, just so everyone knows. ISTO.
ISTO, yes. International Surf Therapy Organization. It's so much easier to say ISTO, but you have to, I mean, I believe that it would behoove you to immerse yourself in surf therapy to understand it fully. And the great thing about it is surf therapy is now on 6 continents. And in any beach you go to these days, you will find a surf therapy program. So the lovely thing is that it's growing. And while we're trying to validate it by promoting research, one way to become a contributor with the International Surf Therapy Org, or ISTO, is you have to be collecting data or collecting research. So yeah, we're working on validating something that, by the way, all of you surfers out there that are listening, we don't need
no, everybody knows. And that's the story. And what I am so blown away by the program is really just where your focus has been in the underserved the list is unbelievable, just of people that you wouldn't imagine who need it so much. And yeah, it's amazing. And yes, for those of us who surf and who have come to surfing, like we all know it's the medicine. It's the, it's the stuff. It's, you go down and you get your medicine, and even in your worst session, you still got your medicine, oh my gosh, it's so cool. It's so cool. I mean, the work's amazing. And just your whole story, I just love it so much. So I want to ask you a couple questions, just as somebody who really did progress, really well. So Candace says you rip, by the way. And I believe
love her.
So, and Candace has served world-class waves all over the world. So I know she knows what she's talking about. So just because I hear a lot of women struggling, I actually had somebody reach out to me. The last podcast I did was me, just blah, 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 talking, because I only had energy to talk to me. So I thought I'd tell my story. And a woman reached out to me who is, she's in her 60s learning how to surf. And she said, the one thing that really helped me was you talking about that combination of pushing and also pulling back and taking care of yourself, because sometimes I second guess myself. I feel like I should be pushing harder. And that was something I struggled with a lot when I first started surfing. I pushed so hard, it was scary. And I was in scary situations, but like you need that breakthrough, but you also need that piece of listening and finding your own voice and listening skills. So that was, for me, probably the biggest piece, this combination of courage and, self-care that came. So, is there one piece you would draw? I mean, so much, your whole life's a metaphor for all of this, but especially I'll get more technical in your case because you have really progressed technically. And number one, I'm sure you're going to say you surfed every day. So that's one thing. But is there anything, you could pull out for people that really are trying to progress? Do you have a ninja trick or anything that you could offer?
Okay, well, we love Candace, but I mean, I don't know if that's the right word. I am fearless. I'll say that. I started off, good or bad, with the adage that ignorance is bliss. And nobody told me I couldn't go on the waves, whether it was, double over my head. Nobody said no. Right. And because nobody said no, when I first started at 41, I mean, up until then, nobody even told me I could surf. And then once I started surfing, nobody said, no, you can't handle that wave. When you have people surrounding you that tell you to go for that wave because they believe you can, you then believe you can. There's a lot of reasons why you want to surf with people. Obviously, safety is one of them. But to me, the more important piece of that is when I have somebody next to me, encouraging me and, yelling to go. And I just have this sense of, okay, if you think I can go, then I must be able to go. But, for me, it kind of goes back to anything else. I think if you really, really want to do it, you find a way to make that happen. And what's so great is there are surf clubs out there. There are a ton of women's only surf clubs, which that's very cool. And there's a lot of women's surf retreats in the most beautiful parts of the world, including Hawaii. And there's just a bond that happens in the lineup for women. I mentioned that I fortunately get to surf with a lot of women. But when I say that, if it's 8 to 10 feet out there, I'm there with 10 guys. Right. I'm not out there with a bunch of women. There's a level at which a bunch of women tend to dissipate, and it's about 3 to 5. It's about 5 feet, maybe 4 feet, really. So when you're out there in the lineup, it's an unspoken bond. We typically cheer each other on, right? We have one another's back because we are still the minority in the ocean. Yeah. And it is important to look out for one another. So I think I'm a fan of fully, I know I keep saying this, but just if you really want to do it, then go do it. And I only mean that in the sense of, if somebody says that they really want to learn how to surf and they want to get better, then I have to go off the assumption that they have a wetsuit and they have surfboards and they have access. And if they don't have any of those, then that obviously is a big obstacle and a hurdle to overcome. But if they have those things, then I think it's really special, and you're very lucky to have those things. And if you do, then just get yourself out there. And I also have a saying that if you can't get into the lineup, you shouldn't be in that lineup. So I'm a big fan of there's no, obviously I am not big wave surfing. There's no toe in surfing around me. But if I cannot physically get myself out there, then I know I shouldn't be out there. And I also have a saying that I love butterflies when I'm in the lineup, because I know that I'm challenging myself and I know that I'm pushing myself. But again, a smile goes a long way. Make friends in the lineup, even if you don't ever have to. How many times do you not know people's names? Like you have nicknames for people that you see over and over again if you're at one particular break, but make sure that you people know who you are, because you want to make sure that somebody notices if there's a board floating and there's not a human being on it, and they just talk to that human being. So I think it's really, there's something that the community of surfing is very special. And there is this aloha, there can be this aloha. There can unfortunately also not be aloha in the lineup. I'm sure I've experienced it. I'm sure all people have experienced it at one time. But yeah, I think when we're learning, when we're later in life, I'm not going to get on this. I'm not going to go on my soapbox, but eating healthy and keeping yourself healthy off of the beach, off of the ocean, out of the ocean, that is much, it will increase your ability to serve tenfold. Stretching. I never used to have to stretch. I'm sure a lot of people younger than us, Sheila, are like, stretching. Right. Okay, you got to stretch. I think yoga is one of the best things I do on land that helps me in surfing. And fully, it's just stretching. But
yeah, I've also discovered, like, now that I'm in my 50s, weights, heavy weights, especially on the legs, like COVID shut everything down, but I was just learning to do presses, like pretty heavy weights. And that really helped my strength, especially for shortboarding, because one thing that's happened to me is, like, I get less, like in Hawaii, you have to walk down the rocks all the time. Right. So you're taking a big step down. And I really noticed my strength and balance being affected by just not having the quad strength, so that was a really interesting thing because of how you have to enter the water, and it's always kind of dicey here. So it starts to be, and this isn't going to be for everybody, but definitely in the 50s and on, you start to lose muscle. So you got to stretch and you got to build muscle. Everything's a little more work, but those are great
absolutely
tips.
And an Indo board too helps, or a balance board.
Oh, I need to get one of those.
I'm telling you, I put my balance board on my yoga mat and I brush my teeth on it.
Oh,
because I'm not trying to do tricks. Again, let's, especially if you're learning how to surf it later in life. First of all, let go of your ego. Nobody cares what you look like out there because they're too busy and worried about what they look like.
Great point. Yes.
Don't worry about what you look like. We're all kooks for life, beginners forever, groms if you're lucky. So it's one of those things where it's like, you really got to let go of your ego. And I have been in sports my whole life. And as I mentioned earlier, I grew up skiing and I have wakeboarded and golfed and I do all the sports. And I still think surfing is the hardest one to.
And encouraging. I think that's going to be encouraging for people to hear.
But it's also why we love surfing. Yes. I want, as a reminder to those who might get frustrated in the beginning, just so you know, the secret is the reason we keep coming back is because we know we'll never master it. Mm-hmm, and being a student of Mother Ocean for the rest of your life is a privilege.
Oh, that's such a great line. We got to enshrine that. Being a student, I would end on that if I didn't need to ask you one more question. But yeah, being a student of Mother Ocean for the rest of your life is a real privilege. I'll make a note of that when I go to edit because that's so good. That's sort of the encapsulate. It's so true. I've been so grateful to be back in the water because I was so sick and I've got this ovary thing and surgery coming and all this stuff. And I was just, when I first slid back into the water, I was so grateful and everything was flowing. And then the thing came back, like I got back on the shortboard and I was struggling with my pop-up again and all this stuff, and then surfing really low tide. And my daughter was so cute. She was like, and she's really super competitive and hard on herself. But I said something to her last night. I'm like, gosh, I'm struggling with my pop-up again. She's like, you shouldn't be so hard on yourself. Like you've just been going through a lot and you should give yourself a break. I'm like, oh, thanks, honey. And so today I went out in high tide shortboard and I was like, it's totally crowded, but I was friendly. And I was there. I was like, I just want one well-surfed wave. That's all I want, just to feel, that feeling that you have when you're like, connection. And that to me, I know is what it's not like, I'm not trying to, spray anyone, although, now and again, that might've been fun, but coming back to that place. And I know it when it clicks and you just feel it. And it's all that whole combination. I had to paddle. Somebody was paddling under me, so I knew it was my wave. So, they weren't being rude. They were just trying just in case. And all those pieces came together, like let go of the ego. And I had to make myself be patient because I get impatient and I start scratching around for anything. I'm like, no, you're going to be patient. The wave is here. So all the self-talk that had to come into it. and just the watercolor being so beautiful and just bringing all those pieces back. And then, it just happened. I caught the wave, my feet ended up in the right spot. I made it through the section. I got a little cutback, and, I took the moment to be like, I'm so proud of myself. I did it. And it just felt, it's when all those things come, everything we practice every day, like all the things that happen internally every day. Some days for me, I'm full of aloha and community. Other days, not so much, some days I know exactly how to push myself. Other days, I don't. I mean, every day it's as different as every wave, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, talk about a metaphor.
Yeah.
And being able to serve all of those pieces of you when you're out there. If you want to go and just sit and be in peace, I mean, you're not going to want to go right to the peak where everybody's fighting to get the wave. You just paddle away a little bit and allow yourself to have that space.
Totally.
I always say, ride the wave, not the expectation.
Oh,
and
I like that too.
Every time I lower my expectations when it comes to what I think the surf is going to be, I always have the best sessions. Unfortunately, when I read the swell forecast and it says it's going to be great and it's 4 to 6 A-frames, and I get out there and it's not anywhere near that, I'm obviously very depressed and bummed. And then I just have to remind myself, ride the wave, not the expectation. And it is such a good metaphor for what's on land, because we have no control over the waves. We wish we had perfect 5 to 7 foot A-frames every single day, glassy, perfect peaks where we can go right and left all day long. And it's much like life, right? Like we never even know what's going to be served up to us on land. We have no idea. I mean, at least when we're in the water, we assume the thing that will be served up is a wave. We don't know what the wave will look like, but we assume a wave. Whereas on land, we have no idea what's going to be served up to us. And it's that idea of just like ride what's been given to you rather than wishing and hoping for it to be something other than what it is. Because it can never be anything other than what it is. So
that's the truth. Well, shoot, I had more questions, but I think we'll have to maybe do it again sometime.
Or go in the lineup and have our own.
Yeah. We'll just we'll just surf together. But I mean, thank you so much. Thank you so much for showing up. And, I have to say something about that showing up, because I talk to a lot of people, not just in this world, but I've been in many industries, and there's an energy that somebody brings to the table when it would never occur to you that person wouldn't show up. And you bring that like from day one. Candace gave me your number. I texted you, you texted right back. You've been like super communicative, ready. Just so everyone knows, Kris scheduled an interview. She's like, well, I'm going to Cornwall and I'm going to all these different places, but Saturday at 4 p.m. I'm available. So we had scheduled this thing, weeks out, and then I got sick and missed it. But there is this incredible presence, like, when we were having Zoom troubles trying to connect, I 100% knew every part. There was like, or when it took a minute for you to come on, I don't know if I'm articulating this well, but the presence you bring, just knowing you are going to be present, is really powerful. And you don't do it, I don't think, by teleporting ahead. It's just you have this solidity and commitment and joy, and it's just very cool. So I can see how it has amplified this experience. It's very inspiring talking to you. Like
thank you so
totally
much.
Just a sweet, down-to-earth person. But this other thing you bring is really magical. And
you're so wonderful, Sheila.
I've grown from it.
So. Well, we learn presence in the ocean. Right. I mean, hey, another reminder to our new surfers tuning in. Most of the time you're sitting on your board waiting for the waves. I have a surf app that tells me how long I stood up, and it doesn't matter if I'm out there for 2 hours or 3 hours, but I think the most I've ever clocked in a session, and it was 3 hours out there, was 5 minutes. That's it.
Wow.
The average, because I'm not usually surfing for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yes, people, I work.
Yeah.
But I mean, like an hour and a half to 2 hours every single morning, I'm out there. It's usually about 2 minutes, a minute, 45.
That
So
is
like a lot of it
amazing.
is we learn presence. We learn to be present in the ocean.
Yeah.
There's so many gifts the ocean gives us that we bring back online. We learn to be present, and then we learn to show up. We show up because, I have this vision and this idea. And I used to start the surf therapy programs when I was running the sessions on the beach with this story that these waves are created sometimes thousands of miles away, often hundreds of miles away. And we have the honor and privilege of riding the breath of that wave until it crashes on shore and it's returned back to Mother Ocean. So there's almost a respect and responsibility to that wave when you're on it. And so when you ride with that image and that idea that that you're riding with that one breath of the wave until it's released back to the ocean, it's such a beautiful visual that it has helped me ride waves, not so much with urgency, but with more joy and fully present. So
that's
thank
amazing.
you. Thank you so much, Sheila, for having me and for everything. I cannot wait to go surf with you. We'll do it soon.
Thank you. Likewise.